In the past 3 years, I've taught kindergarten through Spanish 4. So we can adapt anything in this presentation to your very diverse needs. So just let me know if you have some trouble thinking about how to adapt it.
I'm going to get your email address in case
It's here. Yeah, it's velazquez@gcsnc.com. So I'd like to share with you a little bit about my journey and how I implemented LinguaFolio into the classroom. And I want to start by saying it's very unconventional. Every teacher takes LinguaFolio and implements it in their own way, in a different way, and what you decide to do may be very different from what I've decided to do. I got started with LinguaFolio, actually, it was pretty selfish. I was at an elementary school, and they were talking in August about budget cuts for the next year. And that kind of freaked me out a little bit. School just started, and they were talking about the next school year already. So I started LinguaFolio for an advocacy outlet to gain those evidences of what students are learning and to have it so I could take it down to the school board, so I could show the parents, so I could show the administrator, what is it that our elementary school students can do in a foreign language, and why is it important that you fund world languages at the elementary school level?
I mean, that's the biggest struggle we have in our district with, like, they're always trying to cut, and there's always talk about maybe Spanish is not going to be next year because they feel, you know, if they have to cut, it's going to be Spanish. And for me, it's like it's so much more useful the earlier they start.
So this will be good for you too. I started with the dossier, actually, collecting those evidences, because I knew if I could get the evidence in, and if I could somehow document what my students are able to do, it'll be obvious. It'll be a no-brainer. We've got to keep world languages because we already know what we add to learning, what we add to students' lives and to our future. So I was at the elementary school. I had 500 students, and I passed out 500 file folders and said, "This is your LinguaFolio." And I told my elementary school students, LinguaFolio is a compound word. I don't really know that it's a compound word, but that's what I told them. It's when you take language and portfolio and you smash them together and you get LinguaFolio. And so I told them, we're going to take your very best work throughout the year and we're going to put it in your LinguaFolio. And we're going to keep your LinguaFolio this year, and we're going to take it with you next year all the way up to 5th grade, and then you'll take it to middle school with you. So you've got to do your best work for your LinguaFolio. And it was like magic. We would be working on something in class, and one of the students would say, "Can we put this in our LinguaFolio?" And I thought, well, if they're asking to put it in there, of course, right? So I say, yeah, we can do LinguaFolio today. I'm going to do my best work. This is going in our LinguaFolio. And so what I saw automatically is all of a sudden the quality of work and the quantity of work that I was getting out of my students improved. They were willingly, excitingly doing their very best work on everything that was going into their LinguaFolio. And so at the end of the school year, I thought, wow, this is like amazing. I've got my kids on task, they're wanting to learn, they're doing their very best work, I have evidence. I took it to the school board and I got to keep my job that year. And so I thought, well, I'm a great LinguaFolio teacher, right? So that summer I said, I'm going to go to a LinguaFolio workshop, you know, so I can continue this LinguaFolio stuff, but I've got it down pat. And I went to this workshop and I found out that LinguaFolio is like this much, and I was doing this much of it. I was just doing the dossier at that point. And so I said, well, we've got to implement some more things. You know, last year was good, but no, I'm not a good LinguaFolio teacher. We've got to build on what we did last year. And so we started with the background information and the learning styles, and more importantly with the I Can statements. And that year I wrote I Can statements for everything instead of posting essential questions on the board in a language that couldn't be understood by anybody that walked in the classroom because it may or may not be relevant to what was going on in the classroom. Now I had these I Can statements that were showing in English what are my students able to do at the end of the lesson. And my students were reading and they're like, oh, this is what we're going to do today. Okay, this is what I'm going to be able to do today, not a problem. And by the end of the class period, they were able to perform. They were able to do things in the target language. And so I saw a couple of things happen when I implemented those. All of a sudden, instead of getting, in middle school, we love this, right? Are we going to do anything today? Are we going to learn anything? That question just really, as teachers, like, did we learn anything yesterday? This is school, right? Of course we're going to learn. Well, now they would come in and they would see these I can statements on the board, and instead of, are we going to do anything today, they would look and say, oh, so this is what I'm going to be able to do by the end of the class period. And so it gave them a purpose for listening. It kind of got them excited on what they were supposed to do. And they were in English, so anybody that came in my classroom was able to read the I can statements and kind of talk with my kids and learn a little bit about what goes on in a world language classroom and what students are able to do. And again, it was like magic. It had kind of turned up the rigor even just a little bit more. You know, my students know what's expected of them. They know that it's not Miss Velazquez giving them information the whole class period, but they have to be active participants and participate in the target language themselves as well. And so I left that school year thinking again, I am one awesome LinguaFolio teacher, because now I do the dossier and the background information, and I've got these I can statements, so I must be great. And I reviewed my material, and I forgot the very first thing. How many of you have ever done that? You forget the very first thing. Our kids do it all the time. The first thing you tell them is the first thing to forget. And even Anne-Marie today, she said right at the beginning, LinguaFolio is, it's student-driven. It's not about Ms. Velazquez writing all of these I can statements and saying this is what you will do in the classroom today. I needed to relinquish some of that power to my students. That was pretty scary. Think about that. In the middle school, giving them power on what they're going to learn. In my mind, I knew what they were going to say. I was going to say, what would you like to learn from this chapter? And my kids are going to say, nothing. I don't know. I don't want to be here, Miss V. Is it lunchtime yet? And I thought, this isn't going to work. This is going to flop. But I remembered back so far, everything in LinguaFolio had improved student quality and quantity of work. So I thought, we'll try it. You know, it's not going to hurt anything because, it's middle school. It's hard to get kids motivated to want to learn a world language.
Were you teaching the same kids from year to year? Did you have some of the students for the third year at that point?
No. Nope, these were my brand new kids.
So you had to start from scratch with everything else that you'd done before to make sure that you had those foundations?
Yeah, at the middle school. My middle school and elementary did not articulate to. They didn't. The kids didn't go to the same middle school from elementary.
These kids knew nothing about LinguaFolio.
No, had to start with them and teach them about LinguaFolio and what it was, and we did that, and that was fun. And I did it all in 1 year. This is what we're doing, because I knew how to work LinguaFolio, or so I thought. And so I was able to implement it with them, not a problem. And they bought it, they loved it. They got it. When it came down to student-driven I can statements, it really kind of freaked me out, though. So I gave them their textbook and said, you know what, I want you to open up the textbook, and look at the chapter. I said, you don't have to read anything. In fact, don't waste your time reading it. You don't have to read it. Just look at the pictures. And so they flipped through the chapter and looked at the pictures and kind of got an idea of what the chapter may be teaching. And I said, okay, from looking at the pictures in this chapter, what is it that you would like on this topic, you would like to be able to do in Spanish? And they thought about it for a second, and I'm bracing myself for, but I was surprised. My students didn't say, I don't know. My students didn't say, I don't want to learn anything. They said, one girl raised her hand on clothing, and she said, I would like to learn how to be a fashion designer in Spanish. And I thought, she's testing me. She's trying to see if I'm really going to let them do this. And sure enough, the next kid raised their hand. I would like to go shopping in Spanish. And I thought, okay, what have I done? But we wrote down all of their ideas. We picked 4 or 5 from the chapter. And I went home that night and looked at them, and I realized, you know what? These I can statements, the ones that my students came up with, they're really similar to I can statements that I have always done. with this chapter. It's in their own words, and it let them think that it was their idea. I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. There's only so much you can do with clothes, okay? Usually in a clothing chapter, there's something about putting together outfits and describing those outfits. And sometimes there's even a runway where you have a fashion show and there's an announcer, and I thought, oh, there's my fashion designer. Check.
We're connecting outfits to seasons and outfits to activities so that you have the right clothes when you get to Bermuda versus getting to Aspen, Colorado.
Right. And the shopping, being able to ask and answer questions about clothes and commerce and prices, and all of this naturally flows in most chapters that deal with clothes. And so I thought, these are the same I can statements that I have, but now my students think they're their I can statements, so we're going to see what goes. And so I took their unit I can statements and posted them on the wall. And I thought, okay, as a professional, now as a teacher, if this is where we want to go, if this is where the students want to go, what do I need to do to get them ready to be successful at doing that activity? And so I would step back, without their advice, without their opinions, I would step back and say, okay, what I can statements do I need to write to scaffold up so that they will be able to do this big I can statement that they want to do? And I would write my daily lesson plan I can statements and put them on the board. And I would say, today, this is what you need to be able to do, because it's going to help you be able to do your I can statement that you said you wanted to do. And it was like magic again. All of a sudden, the students had ownership. It wasn't me requiring them to learn something. It was me helping them learn what they wanted to learn. When we think about it, we're the same way as learners. I think back to high school English, and my English teacher would give me a classic and say, you need to read the first 3 chapters tonight. And inevitably, I hated that book. I didn't want to read it. It was terrible. It was the worst book written. Why would anybody need to read this book? But when I was given the choice to read, even classics, I would read them and love them and want to read more and more and do more with them. And so it's kind of tricking the students a little bit and saying, what do you want to learn? Okay, now I'm going to help you learn what you want to learn. And it really did change dramatically. I had these middle school students who didn't really want to be in school, but were all of a sudden wanting to learn the world language. So what I'd like to do now is show you some examples of I can statements and some student evidences that go with it, but we can pause first and see if you have any questions before we move on. Okay, so this first unit is a unit on animals. It was specifically written for an elementary school, but it could be adapted to any level 1 world language. And you'll see that these unit I can statements start out very basic. I can name 5 animals. And then they increasingly get harder and harder. I can categorize animals by what they eat. I can describe the 3 types of animals. I can write a 4-sentence description of animals. At elementary school, that's huge. Mm-hmm. Even in English, that would be huge. And so now we're going to try to do it in a
differentiating the instruction. Because some of your kids are going to be able to just name 5 animals, but there are other kids that are more advanced and they can do more than that. And then you have the heritage learners that already speak it at home. Then they can work on sentences.
Yeah. And so this is an example of starting and working in elementary school and writing those I can statements. This is a file folder that I made out of a poster board and just cut it to look like a file folder. And at the top is what we think we already know about animals. And this is done primarily in English, because at this point in level 1, especially elementary school, they don't have that background knowledge in the target language. And so it goes along with their content, what they learned about animals in class. The little sticky notes are any Spanish that they might know about animals that they can put on there. So I always want to validate that as well. And at the bottom is what we want to learn, the new learning that we're going to do during this chapter. And these are on sticky notes so that throughout the unit, as they learn something at the bottom, and it's not something they want to learn, but something they now know, they can connect it to what it is that they already knew originally from the unit. I can categorize animals by what they eat. This was done on a smartboard, but you could very easily do this with cut and paste and have students place the animals. It's a listening activity as well as writing and talking, and they just put the animals in the category where they're an herbivore, a carnivore, or an omnivore. Again, going along with their curriculum. I can describe the 3 types of animals, and so here we're trying to work up to more sentences. It may or may not be a complete sentence yet, but we're working towards it. This was done on a smartboard, but you don't have to do it on a smartboard. You could do it pencil paper, you could do it on the whiteboard just as easily, or maybe more easily. And then finally being able to write a 4-sentence description. Here the students have a picture of their animal at the top, and they've written a paragraph about the animal at the bottom. And now I told my students the goal was 4, but most of them were writing 9. Very basic sentences. It's elementary school, very, very basic, but the amount of acquisition that went on during the unit was amazing. This unit is again on level 1. This was taught in the middle school. I can identify 5 rooms in a house, okay, and then we increase all the way up to I can compare and contrast my home to homes of those in other countries. That's a lot. That's a lot of language, a lot of learning. Even at the middle school or the high school level, at any level 1, that's quite ambitious. And I could tell you, apart from LinguaFolio, I would not be able to make that happen. I can identify rooms in a house. This student decided that he wanted to do a Prezi. They didn't have to do Prezis. Most students did not. Most students did it on pencil, drew their house. But it helped him to use the computer. It's what he wanted to do with the same outcome. I can write a 4-sentence description about my home for a realtor. And so this student actually did the paper copy, made his own house, and now he's writing a description to go with it. I can make a list of chores for my family members, and this is actually adapted from the textbook that we use in my district. This was done in Excel, but you could use graph paper to do the exact same thing to see who does more in the house. Is it the men or the women? And then finally, I can compare and contrast my house to homes in other countries. And they had a Spanish-speaking, in my case, that's what I teach, a Spanish-speaking country, and they had to pick a home from a larger city, a home from a smaller city, and then compare and contrast those to homes here in the United States. And this last unit is on family. Again, you can see that the I can statement.
This one, for example, how did you help them when there were words that they didn't know? Would they go to a dictionary? Did they ask you?
No, in level 1, I don't let my kids use a dictionary. I ask them to focus on what they know. And then once we get the foundation more in level 2, when they're able to distinguish on how to use the dictionary wisely.
They want to use a word and they don't know the word.
I've trained my students to focus on what they do know, and then they know if there's a word that they want to use a lot that we haven't talked about, then we can add that to our vocabulary. But I want them to be able to remember this for a while, and so the more repetition we have with vocabulary, the longer they're going to remember it. And I know for me, when I look back at some of my work from my times as an early language learner, I would find all these words in there that I didn't even know what they meant, and it didn't mean anything to me after the moment. So this next unit is on family. I can read a book about a family. Ideally, this would be audio where you could hear the students reading. Family trees. Family trees are quite complicated nowadays to try to figure out. Basically here, I'm just wanting to assess, though, can you introduce members of your family? And so I'm looking more at the language than I am on how correct their diagram is of their family members. It helps when doing this, though, to pick a famous family. We've recently been using the president's family because he has the younger children and he has a wife and you see grandparents. And so that's all we do. We don't get into aunts and uncles and as far as family trees go.
My husband uses pictures of The Simpsons. So it could be fictional characters too, or Modern Family if you want to show kind of complicated family dynamics. Whatever they're watching, you can use that and capitalize on that for getting the pictures to get them started with family if they don't want to describe their personal family.
So lastly, I would just leave a big component of LinguaFolio is also that reflection piece. And a quick reflection we do in my classroom is 3 means I can do this all the way without any help. I've got it. A 2 means I can do it, but I need a little bit of help. And a 1 means I need to work on this a little bit more. Okay? Yeah, thank you so much for your participation. Keep in touch throughout the school year. Okay, send me emails if you want to brainstorm some encouragement.